I can't believe it's 2016 and we still have to talk about this. Look, feminism isn't about hating men. It simply isn't. By saying that it is, you're misrepresenting feminism and not allowing for rational discourse to take place. This is a logical fallacy called a straw man. When you say that feminists hate men, you make yourself sound reasonable because you don't hate men. But here's the thing, neither do I, and neither do most feminists. But you see how I said most? That must be proof that some feminists hate men, right? Well, yeah, sure, probably, somewhere. You see, feminism isn't an organization. We don't have meetings, we don't have leaders, we don't have rules for membership. If someone wants to call themselves a feminist while doing things that I would 100% consider not feminist, they're well within their rights to do so. But feminism as a whole doesn't hate men. By its very definition, seeking equality and justice on the basis of gender, sexuality, and race, feminism isn't about hating men. But maybe you get confused when we talk about things that relate to being a man. There are a few concepts that we regularly critique and argue against, and it's possible that some of those could be misconstrued as being against men. So today, I want to break down a few of those concepts. First up is toxic masculinity, which is a phrase that refers to all of the negative aspects of our culture's definition of masculinity. So basically, when you're raised as a man in our society, you're raised with certain ideas about what it means to be a man, and some of those are very harmful. Toxic masculinity asserts that for men to be considered men, they have to be violent, aggressive, dominant, angry, and never cry or show emotions. Toxic masculinity assumes all men to be potential rapists by saying that a woman who is dressed a certain way was asking for it, as if men can't resist the temptation to rape someone when they see a little bit of skin. It also assumes all men to be straight. You've probably heard someone say that they became a man after they first had sex with a woman. And not wanting to have sex with women means people will probably say you're not really a man. This is bad for everyone. It's bad for women and other gender minorities who are often the victims of toxic masculinity-fueled violence, and it's bad for rape survivors who are blamed for what happened to them. And it's harmful to men because it limits who they are allowed to be. We know that there are men who don't want to be violent and aggressive, but lash out because it's the manly thing to do. We know that men should be able to cry and show their emotions. We know that men can be gay or bisexual or pansexual. By identifying toxic masculinity as the problem that it is, we hope to open up even more avenues for men to be masculine in non-toxic ways. Second is the patriarchy, the big scary word that's always associated with feminism. Patriarchy, in its simplest form, is a social system where men hold the most power. In our society, that's obvious in a bunch of different ways. A majority of elected officials being men, all of the presidents ever being men, and most major CEOs being men, etc., etc. When feminists talk about dismantling the patriarchy or destroying the patriarchy, we aren't talking about destroying men, we're talking about achieving equality through justice. Since the patriarchy is a system where men are considered superior, we should all want to destroy the patriarchy. Fighting the patriarchy isn't fighting men. It's fighting inequality and wanting to live in a world where we're on an equal playing field to men. And maybe that sounds scary because you have to give up some power. Because if you're at the top of an unequal system, you do have more power than those below you. But just imagine what it's like for women and other gender minorities to live in this world every day without that power. Third is gender roles, which you've pretty clearly seen laid out if you've ever been to a toy store. Blue is for boys, pink is for girls. Guns, tanks, and cars are for boys. Dolls, flowers, and makeup are for girls. Gender roles, at their core, are completely arbitrary. Pink used to be considered a masculine color, and blue used to be considered a feminine color, but that switched sometime around the 30s or 40s. Other things we associate with gender, like makeup, dresses, or short hair, are equally made up. And this goes beyond material possessions. Gender roles tell us how to act and behave. In that way, they're very closely linked with toxic masculinity. Men are supposed to be dominant, and women are supposed to be submissive. Men are supposed to work a real job, while women are supposed to stay home and take care of the kids. This all has the incredibly detrimental effect of putting people into little boxes, and we know that men and women are far more diverse than that. And on top of all of that, gender roles completely erase the existence of gender non-conforming people, because there are people who feel in between or outside binary genders, or people who don't feel any attachment to gender at all. And talking about gender as a binary pretends that they don't exist. So when we say that we want to destroy gender roles, it doesn't mean we want to stop you from being a man. You're free to be whatever you want. We just want you to be able to decide what being a man means for you, rather than strictly adhering to arbitrary and oppressive gender roles. Fourth is sexism, which you've definitely heard of. Sexism is the institutionalized discrimination against a gender or genders. Because it has to be institutionalized, that is, built into our societal systems, you can only be sexist against women or other gender minorities. Yeah, there are people who will argue that you can be sexist against men, but that's an unnecessarily defensive argument over semantics. Does sexism require institutional backing? I would say yes, and because of that, only gender minorities, including women, face sexism, while men can still face discrimination. discrimination. If you say no, then you think everyone can face sexism. Like I said, arguing about this isn't very useful and only serves to deny that there's institutionalized gender discrimination. What I mean by that is how sexism is baked into the very foundation of everything that we do. It's how most characters in any show or a movie are men. It's how women are catcalled and harassed on the streets daily, and it's how women are paid less than men for doing the same work. When we say that we hate sexism, we mean that we hate how discrimination so negatively affects us. This doesn't mean that we hate men or that all men are sexist. It just means that we hate the discriminatory actions against us. Fifth is male privilege, which goes hand in hand with sexism. If sexism is the idea that gender minorities are at a disadvantage, male privilege is the idea that men are at an advantage. Now, that's not to say that all men have it better than everyone else. You also need to account for class, race, ability, and all of that. But in general, if women are losing out, men are gaining something from that. Obviously, if you're a man, that's not your fault. You didn't create the system that we're in. But you do benefit from male privilege. When you're loud and demanding, you're more likely to be called strong than bossy. You can walk down the street without having to worry about catcallers. You can dress how you want or sleep with who you want, and you won't be called a slut. Having male privilege doesn't make you a bad person, and we don't hate you for it, but you do need to be able to recognize it. And lastly, there's misogyny, the hatred of women. This is very similar to sexism in that it's used to talk about things that are harmful to women, but I feel like misogyny has more anger behind it. But I think what really trips people up is that they don't want to be branded a misogynist. Because you can definitely do or say misogynistic things without necessarily being a misogynist. We're all constantly growing and evolving, and we're all raised with misogynistic ideas in our head. So yeah, sometimes we're going to say or think misogynistic things. But when someone says, hey, what you just said is misogynistic, they're not saying, you're a terrible person who hates women. They're just saying that what you said contributes to the hatred of women, so maybe you should reconsider it. Hating misogyny means standing up to things that degrade or demean women, and oftentimes men feel like it's their right to be able to treat women like that. So I think that by fighting misogyny, sometimes men feel like we're telling them what they can and cannot do. But obviously, you're free to say misogynistic things if you want. But we're free to criticize those things. And it really doesn't hurt to think about the consequences that your words and actions have towards women. By hating misogyny, we're literally hating the hatred of women. I feel like that's something we can all get behind. So these are the 6 things that feminists hate that aren't men: toxic masculinity, the patriarchy, gender roles, sexism, male privilege, and misogyny. These are all clearly related to men, but they're not men. In fact, dismantling a lot of these things would help men too. I hope that's clear. Feminists don't hate men. Saying that we do avoids addressing our real arguments. And this video is a part of a series I'm doing for Everyday Feminism, a website dedicated to helping you stand up to and break down everyday oppression. So I'll put a link down below so you can check out my previous videos in the series. And that's all for today. I love you all very much. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next week. Okay, bye!